If I was going to speak to Putin, what would I say? What would I say as a person? So, the lead up would be me putting aside everything that I am in order to speak to him as a person. I am a Texan. I have been born and raised in North Texas. I have lived in the United States my entire life. I've visited Europe, yes. I am a Hindu. I am 75% all the areas Vikings were. More like 70. And 15% Native American and 5% African. And there's a few percents in other areas. And I'm a very liberal person in general. More liberal than most Democrats. Vast majority of Democrats. But if I was going to place all of that aside, push it off to the side, and address Putin as a human being, I would look at him and say, the reason you can't win this war is the same reason why our last president, before this one, commanded the Pentagon and the State Department to seize voting machines, and those departments said no. There is a long establishment in the United States of America that many people have been building up for many decades, many years, at least many decades, if not a couple hundred years, of a foundational institution that cannot be torn apart by one leader in 4 years or 8 years. Why I say it's the same reason is because if you rule for a long period of time, you are able to tear apart what everybody else before you built. And you might tell yourself that you're preserving it, that you're enhancing it, that you're pushing it forward, whatever nation that you're in, and that perhaps only you can do so, and that only you can achieve the grander dream that your country always had. You'll say that, but the louder that you yell, and you keep on yelling, the less you'll be able to hear anyone else. The less that you'll want to hear anyone else. The United States of America, it's done a lot of bad things. It's gone through a lot of phases of existence as a nation. But, for better or for worse, it is the leading superpower in the world. For better or for worse. And it has allies that are allied with it for a number of reasons. Some of them good, some of them convenient, most of them convenient. And since the interim between what the United States and its allies are and where your idea of your alliance was, your country hasn't been catching up. But that's not necessarily the problem. Your idea of your country and its future hasn't been catching up. It's not ideology. It's not that the United States is better. The only reason the United States has probably the most power in the world is not because the United States is better than any other nation. It just happens to be at the very tip of human progress for right now. Nobody wins for long. The United States won't win for long. But I'm not considering decades, I'm considering hundreds of years in this. Human progress, human culture, it always has certain cultures and nations at the tip of the spear that moves forward. There's no one nation that is specifically better for any one or lesser reason. Rome, for a long time, seemed the driving force for human culture, and its influences have influenced the United States very much, and republics and democracies, and before that, Greece influenced the idea of democracies and republics. And even in spirituality and culture, the East and India influenced a lot of culture and spirituality at various times. There's always a certain amount of nations at the spear point of human progress. The United States is one of them right now. It won't be like that forever. But Putin, if you're hoping to wait that out, our lifetimes will not encapsulate the story of the United States or its allies. We are human beings, so the more invested in politics and our time and our interests that we are, the harder it is to see the curve of human history, the cycle, the circle. The closer you are to a line, the more it looks like a line. But time in human history isn't a line. It's a circle of cycles. There have been so many men, and in recent history, they have been men, the last thousands of years, who have been so focused on their vision for their nation and for human history in general. They've been so close to that line that it seems so linear, and also they believed in their dreams so much that they thought that their horizon was the horizon of every other single human being. And if those other human beings couldn't see that horizon, is because they were partially blind. That's what a lot of leaders do. That's what happens. Studying history is a sobering factor. And when you only look at history or political ideology or your nation or all the nations of the world from a single point of view, and you don't accept other people's point of view, your world becomes two-dimensional at the most, one-dimensional at the least. When you can't accept the evidence around you, in the recent past and what's happening right now, you have to ask yourself if you're competent. And if you're not, most people, when they realize that they're wrong from one fact or another, or one experience or another, the vast majority of the human race will double down rather than admit that they are wrong. You have to ask yourself, are you doubling down on your falsehood, or are you accepting the new information in an objective way? Political ideology, it's temporal. the passion that is behind political ideology throughout history has been temporal. Liberal and conservative, communist, fascist, monarchical, imperialist versus anarchism. All these things are recent inventions, recent labels to slap on the ideas that have always existed for as long as that we have historical record going back thousands of years. And the emotions of individuals, our emotions, we attach those to these ideas. We attach our identity to these ideas. But circumstance is vaster than one political perspective, one spiritual perspective even. I think that sometimes fiction can inform us very well. So I'm going to give you two fictitious examples of the heart and the breadth of what I'm getting at that are fiction, but they're examples of what I'm talking about. Because when you give literal, factual, historical examples, we tend to take sides. We tend to want to attach ourselves to, okay, I'm against this, or I'm not against this, I'm with this, what have you. In The Expanse, started out as an RPG game, actually. Then it became books, then it became a show. There's this one, so just briefly talking about the basic layout is that, Earth has, 40 billion people on it, and Mars, that was colonized a while back, has 4 billion people. And the belt is composed of people who mine the raw materials and mainly water from meteors outside of the inner planets in our solar system, still in our solar system. But over time, they kind of form their individual factions. That's what humans do, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view. And the United States, not the United States, Jesus, I'm showing my bias, I suppose. The Earth, the United Nations, kind of like, that's what Earth is now, the United Nations. And there's this one United Nations secretary, general secretary of the grander staff of the United Nations. And she happens to be on a certain ship, and I'm not going to give you all the details and things like that. If you want to, look up The Expanse. It's a really good show, really good book series. And I hope to play the game one day, board game. But somebody asks her, and there's this proto-molecule, this alien molecule that's not just molecule, like this substance that got attached to a space station and then turned it into like some kind of machine. And this like bioengineered machine started creating this like its own station in a way. And, we find out that Earth, an Earth-based company, was trying to use this protomolecule as a weapon that they can use against Mars and other places, blah, blah, blah. But the protomolecule is isolated, they think, in this one research base where there's a whole bunch of these protomolecule monsters that combine with human beings that could be launched onto a planet, and no known military thing can kill it besides a really big nuclear bomb. And somebody on her ship says, and she's not even in charge of the ship. She's I think it's a she. She says, why don't you just, we don't want to nuke that base where the protomolecule is, because there's a lot of children test subjects that aren't, protomolecule monsters yet. There's a possibility that they're all alive. Maybe a couple dozen. But nuking that base would possibly secure the lives of millions of people, even children on other planets and in the belts and, in stations and things like that. It would delete the threat. And she asks, and then the secretary responds, do you want me to tell you how I justify it, or the real reason that I don't? And she asks, how do you justify it? Perhaps there's other protomolecule monsters out there. Perhaps there's information on that station, on that installation, on this little moon, that can lead us to these other monsters that are out there and these other test facilities. And if we destroy it, if we just nuke it, put a bunch of nukes on it, then we'll never get that data. And then she asks, what's the real reason? And Avasarala, the secretary says, I don't kill children even when it's the right thing to do. It makes sense to nuke this base with a lot of nukes, to wipe it off the face of this tiny moon that it's on. It seems compassionate, it seems logical. But she says, I don't kill children, even when it's the right thing to do. And I'm going to lead in with another little bit of a story from Doctor Who. There's this humans and fish people. They've been on this little they've been on this little colony on this little planet for a long time, and they've been cloning themselves again and again and again, fighting each other for so long. And Doctor Who is a Time Lord. The human general that started the whole war, that wanted to get rid of everybody, and he, after the whole scheme is figured out and how the cloning process is really messed up and everything like that, the Doctor, he takes a gun, he points it at this general's head, and he wants to pull the trigger. This is this guy's fault. All this death for so long, for decades and decades, is this guy's fault. But he holds himself back. He says, he turns the gun around, grabs the barrel, and holds it out and says, I never would. Found your society on this. Someone who never would. What am I getting at? There's this old Hindu saying, using another analogy, when we prefer our children to the children of others, war is near. Eventually, somebody has to be an adult and start making the decision. The United States hasn't done it yet. We're still bombing places where we think terrorists are that have children in the same houses. I don't like using the word we, but I'm here. But I don't have any illusions of purity for even my own nation. But there has to be some people that start being adults. Start actually looking at this as not as an us and them, as much as all of us are human beings. And if we, no matter what, refuse to kill children, if they're in danger at all, bombing, shooting, what have you, somebody has to start making that adult decision to where we stop killing children, human children, anywhere, whoever they are. Somebody has to start making that decision. I'm nobody. My opinion doesn't matter. But I think if we start making that decision, somebody has to start it. If we start making that decision, the world will start to cascade into a better place. At any rate, thank you very much for watching, and all of you, have a wonderful day.